It's account review time! Hey everyone, Shark here, and we got some overwhelmingly positive responses for account reviews. There are literally hundreds of submissions and it will take me a really long time to get through them all, so please be patient. In the meantime, make sure to watch these videos because even if it takes a while for me to get to your specific account, the information here is still valuable to understanding how to build characters and how to put a team together. And obviously, since there are a ton of accounts to review, you can check the other account review videos that I'll have in a special playlist for an even better understanding of how to build characters, teams, and progress your account. With all that being said, it is a lot of work to review literally hundreds of accounts, so if you could like the video, it would really mean a lot to me. It takes hours and hours of work for me, but all I need is a quick tap of that thumbs up button from you. And now that you've liked the video, let's jump into the account reviews. Alright, next person. They basically want help with everything. One hit around 10k or so, that should be pretty easy. Like Zhao Hatham Zhao, Wanderer, Yulan Jingcho, Bennett. Yeah, you can definitely hit 10k with that, so let's take a look at what you've got. Alright, Grizzly Meister, AR-55, world level 8. Oh yeah, we can definitely help you out here. Well, first of all, let's, before we go over your Zhao, let's just take a look at some of your characters here. Zhao, Official, Xiangling, Kokomi. Okay. Alright. Okay, a few things. I guess we'll start with Zhao. First of all, EM, defense, oof, get rid of those. Do attack, you can do Animo Goblet, or you can do attack Goblet, and then you want to do a crit damage headpiece here. Also, you don't need Wanderer's Troop at all. Go like 2-piece attack, Animo damage bonus, something like that. The deathmatch has a pretty low base damage, so you do want to level that up, and you will get a little bit more crit there, so your crit is fine, but your crit damage is low, and your attack, especially for Zhao, is very low, especially being level 90 too. To give you an idea of the stats you want to aim for, you should have about double the amount of attack you have currently, and you should have about double the amount of crit damage you have as well. Even if you are just using a complete rainbow set of a bunch of random artifacts with no set bonuses at all, it's much better to have higher total stats than it is to try and do some sort of 2-piece, or 4-piece set with Zhao, or really any on-field DPS character. So yeah, he definitely does not need defense, he needs more attack, more damage percent, more crit damage, all of that stuff. And you do want to level his talents up too. You want to get all of these to 8, because he does use all of them, and they are big factors that increase his damage. If you have some good main stat pieces, give them to Zhao right away and level those up, especially because these are like plus 12, plus 0, plus 6. If you get them to plus 16 at least, you'll see a big improvement. Once you do that, then go to the deathmatch, get that to 90. If you don't have any good artifacts for Zhao, just like any good main stat pieces for him, then get the deathmatch to 90 first, then work on his talents. When you do that, you'll definitely see a very big difference there. Alright, let's look at Official now. Official is 80 non-ascended, plus 12 artifacts, Berserker sets, crit rate of 27, crit damage of 98, using the Rust. Okay, for Official, definitely want to level her weapon, and you want to level Oz, her skill. You don't actually need to level her normal attacks or her burst at all, just her skill. And you do want to get this as high as possible, so if you wanted to make her better, ascend her, she'll get more attack percent. Develop Oz, level that up to at least 8, you can ignore the other talents. Also make sure to get her weapon at least to 90. Rust is not particularly amazing for her, but the attack percent is nice. And then you want to give her some sort of 5-star artifact set. She can mix and match. Official doesn't need a particular 4-piece artifact set. Gilded is very good on her. Thundering Fury can work depending on what team you're using her in too. So just give her something good. It could be 2-piece Glad, 2-piece Shiminawa, could be 2-piece Gilded, could be 2-piece Gladiators, could be 2-piece Thundering Fury, 2-piece something else. Just some sort of good attack, good electro damage goblet, good crit damage, and in your case you may actually want a little more crit rate than crit damage pieces with some decent substats. It's really important to fully build a character if you want to use them, because especially at world level 55, the enemies do have quite a bit of defenses, resistance, and HP. Just so you know, the little specters, the things that look like little floating apples that are super annoying, those things have like 43,000 plus health. And that's just to illustrate that the game really wants you to level your weapons, talents, and artifacts up to a certain point because it feels you should be at a certain level, even though it probably should be adjusted because it's easier to get to AR 50 plus and 55 now than it used to be. So it used to be that you had plenty of time to build your artifacts and characters before you got there, but now since you can get there a lot quicker, you need to take the time to develop only like one, maybe 1.5 teams before pushing really high. Otherwise, it's going to feel like you're getting left in the dust. Though if I were to venture a guess, Grizzly Meister, I probably think you hit AR-55 fairly recently, and what you did was you probably developed several characters along the way instead of focusing on one team. So it seems like a lot of your resin probably went into developing your characters' levels rather than going for things like their weapons, their artifacts, because I bet if I go through here, I'm probably not going to find a lot of really good, like, high developed 5-star artifacts on your characters. But I could be totally wrong, so let's see. So let's move on to Xiangling. She's using the catch level 80, she's also using Berserker, defense, attack, EM. EM can actually be pretty good on Xiangling, but you need her energy recharge to be pretty high, at least like 200% even with Bennett. And you definitely want a higher crit rate and crit damage. Again, mostly just new artifacts, better artifacts, getting the catch to 90, ascending her, getting her Pyro NATO up. You don't need to level Goba, you don't need to level her normal attacks. Xiangling is an extremely good character, and the fact that everyone gets her free is really amazing, but she's also a fairly high investment character. I think a good way to think of her is almost like Tartaglia, and of course the two operate very differently. Tartaglia is an on-field Hydro character, Xiangling is an off-field Pyro character. But both Tartaglia and Xiangling need a pretty high level of investment to really shine. While their base kits and what they can do has always been good, if you don't really give them exactly what they want, which tends to be quite a lot, then they seem a little bit mediocre. As a result, even though they can take advantage of the game's elemental application system and do a lot of things other characters can't, because they're super stat hungry, they don't feel very strong right out of the gate. And in fact, the opposite tends to be true, because if they aren't super well invested into, then they feel kind of weak and you wonder, what's the big deal? Why does everyone rave about this character? So for someone like Xiangling, you're definitely going to need better artifacts with better overall substats, and we'll talk about which artifact domains you should farm later in the video when we talk about some team comps you can make. But for right now, let's move on to the Coco Fish. Kokomi has 3-piece tenacity, some EM there, defense. Ooh, replace this with an HP percent. Don't need defense at all on Kokomi. Also, since a lot of these are +0, they do need to be leveled up. You also don't need any specific artifact on Kokomi. You could give her Deepwood, you could give her Tenacity, you could give her a whole bunch of different things. Just kind of give her whatever your team needs. I'm personally a fan of Kokomi holding something like a 4-piece Tenacity or 4-piece Deepwood to help the team out more than 4-piece Ocean Hued Clam. While the Ocean Hued Clam is nice, the damage it deals is physical, and that's not exactly the greatest. So give Kokomi an HP Sand, she'll heal more and she'll be pretty fine overall. Honestly, she's fairly easy to build, so you don't have to do too much with her, but I would get her Jellyfish up just for more healing if you feel like you need it. And just as another note, while this isn't maybe a huge priority for you right now, it's something you definitely want to do in the future, you do want to get her to level 90, because characters that scale off of HP, defense, anything like that, even characters that proc transformative reactions like EM Hyperbloom Kuki or Sucrose, they really want to be level 90. Alright, let's move on to Wanderer, your other on-field Anemo DPS. Solar Pearl, he's using Gladiator's Viridescent Mixed, artifacts +10, +0, +6, +10, +14, defense, oof, Taxans is fine, okay. Yeah, definitely want a better headpiece and better artifacts, or just, like roll some of the artifacts more than +0. Getting these to +12, +16, that should be like your first goal, and then to farm other artifacts after that. If you get better ones, take those +12, +16 ones, and then roll them into those artifacts. I did an artifact guide video that just got released today, talks a little bit more about that, but essentially that's what you want to do, because you are hurting for some artifacts, my friend. Other than that, you want to level his normal, skill, and burst. These are all important. His normals and his skill are the most important if you have to prioritize. Burst is nice, but it's just extra damage, and you don't necessarily need to prioritize this right away, whereas most of your damage is going to be coming from your skill and burst. And of course, level up his weapon, take it to 90. Solar Pearl is okay on Scaramouche. It's not exactly the greatest weapon for him, but the crit rate is pretty nice. If you do have something like the Wood Sith, I would give that to him, and he also does very well with a lot of 5-star catalysts too. So if one day you randomly get a Lost Prayer or a Skyward Harp from the standard banner, then use one of those on him. Alright, let's take a look at Alhaitham now. Takabu Shigure, very nice. It is level 90, he's 70. You've got Wanderers and Gladiators. EM, Dendro, EM. Nice. Alhaitham actually looks like he might be one of your best built characters. There are still a few things I would consider though. One, he needs more crit rates and a little bit more crit damage. I would run either a crit rate or crit damage piece, and probably crit rate in your case right now, because he's actually got like 82 EM on feathers, quite a lot. That's actually very nice. This EM Sands isn't really very good though, and honestly I would just try to replace this with something, maybe a better Wanderer's Troop feather. Don't try to force a set even though you're getting 80 extra EM. All these substats, really, he doesn't care about any of these at all. Attack percent is okay, but he really wants crit rates, crit damage, energy recharge, and EM. Attack percent is kind of under that. Luckily, he doesn't need a lot of energy recharge, only like between 130 and 140 seems to be pretty fine. However, he does really like crit rate and crit damage, especially if you're running him in a spread team with electro characters. And EM is very important, not only for the extra spread damage, but also the extra damage from his skill, which makes up about 65% of his total damage. So what I would do first with Alhaitham, since you do have a level 90 weapon on him, nicely done, is ascend him to 80 plus, so like level 81 essentially, get his skill up to level 8, and then you can get his normal and his burst up to 7, 8, and then just make sure you take his skill up to the highest level you can first. Afterwards, find artifacts that give him better overall substats. Gilded would be a really good place for you. You could do 2-piece or 4-piece Gilded. The Gladiator's Finale is fine, actually, but I would suggest you getting a better headpiece. Even though EM is quite nice, you do need a bit more crit rate and crit damage. And while an Elemental Mastery Sands can be very hard to get, you do want one with better substats. Alhaitham is another character that can be very stat hungry, so he just wants all the EM, all the crit, a little bit of energy recharge, and a little bit of attack. That combination can be pretty hard to get on artifacts, that's why they made his signature weapon do what it does. Alright, now let's look at Electro Alhaitham, as no one calls her. Let's look at Miss Keqing. Wanderers, Scholars, Lion's Roar, C1, level 70, 444. Yeah, I'm getting the feeling that you probably just got all your artifacts from, various chests and other like world quests and stuff like that. I don't know if you actually farmed artifacts super hard. Maybe you did. If you did, you got pretty lucky with some main stat rolls, but I don't think you've actually earnestly farmed artifact domains. Keqing is very similar to Fischl. You could do Thunder Soother, you could do Gilded, you could do 2-piece, you could do an attack set. She's not really super picky about what artifacts that she wants. She just wants like really good stats overall. She doesn't really care about which set they're coming from. Lion's Roar is pretty nice on her, especially when it's R4. Though honestly, I don't suggest you building her right now. I think you've got too many hyper carries and not quite enough supports, or at least not enough featured here. But when you do decide to level up Keqing, you want to get her weapon to 90, you want to get her talents up, they're all important, and you want to give her a good artifact set that gives her a lot of crit rate, crit damage. 126% energy recharge is fine, because her burst only costs 40 and she can get it back fairly quickly. And of course you want to get her to level 80 Ascended. Now let's take a look at the last character in your roster, Diluc. He's using a Serpent Spine, he's using Gladiators and Crimson Witch. 55, 107, 44, okay. C1, 344. Alright, similar things for Diluc. You want pyro damage here, you want attack here, or EM, either one is fine. And you want a probably crit damage piece. You're going to get a decent amount of crit rate from your Serpent Spine, so you can afford to run crit damage here, and since Diluc also ascends with crit rate, that does help him quite a bit. So if you were to level Diluc to 80 Ascended and get the Serpent Spine to 90, he should have over 50% crit rate. And if you got a crit damage piece here, that would take this to about 112 or so. And now he's starting to look pretty nice. But again, on-field DPS, very stat-hungry character. You definitely want to level up his artifacts, give him things that have a lot of crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, elemental mastery. A little bit of energy recharge can be nice for him, but since Diluc typically runs with characters like Bennett, you don't really need that much on him because he ends up getting fueled by Bennett and his burst only costs 40. Now let's talk about some team builds. I think you said here that I don't know if you have Yu'lon, Xingqiu, and Bennett. I'm going to imagine that you do, and I'll talk about how to make these in the various teams. So we'll talk about that here. So there's a couple things you can make, but I want to focus on mostly Alhaitham and the general national team. So I think some of the best teams you can make are Alhaitham with Fischl and either Kokomi or Yu'lon or Xingqiu and the Dendro Traveler. Basically, the idea behind this team is that it's a sort of Hyper Bloom team. It's more like a Quick Bloom team. It's not really meant or based off of doing lots of Hyper Bloom damage because Fischl cannot actually hit the seeds. Oz doesn't actually shoot the Dendro cores on the ground unless Oz performs like an AoE from Fischl's Ascension 4 and that ends up hitting one of the Dendro cores. But what this team does is it takes advantage of a bunch of different reactions at once. Electrocharge, Spread, Aggravate, Bloom, and of course Hyper Bloom. So if you have Xingqiu, I would put him in this team, but let's say for instance you don't. You can still make a really good team based on these characters. Alhaitham's your lead, he's your on-field DPS. Fischl is a support DPS, you swap her in, use Oz, then when Oz leaves you use her burst, it replaces Oz, and that's basically all you do. Kokomi is your healer and general support. Thrilling Tales is perfectly fine on her. However, you can also run something like the Prototype Amber if you're finding that you need a little bit more energy for your characters. And in a team like this, you can even run Instructors on Kokomi, which should be fine. Basically, the idea here is that Kokomi puts out her jellyfish, it applies Hydro to enemies, it heals you. If you're running her with something like Instructors or Noblesse, you use her Elemental Burst to refresh the duration of her jellyfish, which is something you generally want to do anyways. And if you're using Instructors, it gives your team an EM boost. If you're using Noblesse, it gives your team an attack boost. And then you proceed to use your Dendro Traveler's skill and burst, and finally use Alhaitham and just use him on field for a little bit. Once you've done his burst, you've got a couple sword rains, you used his skill, you've got a couple more sword rains after you refresh his mirrors, then you can switch back to Fischl and do the rotation again. If you're fighting multiple enemies, then most of the Hyper Blooms are actually coming from the beginning of restarting your rotation. Most of the enemies around you should have some sort of Hydro applied to them because of Kokomi, and then because you use Alhaitham for a little bit, they should have some sort of Dendro cores before they disappear because they have a 6-second timer. You'll switch back to Fischl, use her bird, and then when Oz gets summoned, you can fly directly into all of the Dendro cores, creating a Hyper Bloom reaction for, let's say maybe there's 3 to 4 of them, or just summon Oz right on top of the Dendro cores, causing Hyper Blooms that way. In between that, however, you've got the Quicken, Spread, Aggravate, Electrocharge, all those reactions going on. So this team can be really strong, but it does require a little bit of practice to play, especially with Alhaitham, because he's not just a super Unga Bunga character, he does take a little bit of practice to get his rotations down. The second team I would recommend for you would be either a Zhao team or a Wanderer team, whoever you prefer most. And you mentioned in your account review submission form that you want to use characters like Xingqiu and Bennett, so I'm assuming you have Bennett. If you don't, these teams I'm about to suggest won't work, because they're essentially just using Wanderer or Zhao as an on-field DPS with Bennett, and then depending on who you decide, you can either use Xiangling and Xingqiu, or you can use Xiangling and someone else. But since you said you wanted to use characters like Xingqiu and Bennett, I'm going to suggest using Wanderer, Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Bennett to just do a Wanderer national team. This team is pretty simple, it's just the national team but with the Wanderer as a driver for the team, so you use Bennett's burst, then you use Xingqiu's burst, then you use Xiangling's burst, you snapshot the buffs for Xiangling, then you switch to Wanderer, you can use his burst in Bennett's circle, and then you float up, and then you just start normal and charge attacking all the enemies. You have to be pretty careful about your positioning, because if you get hit while in the air with Wanderer, it feels really bad. And because of the AoE range of Xiangling's burst, you do have to be fairly close to enemies. But this team will do a lot of damage. Now, since you mentioned Yu'lon, Xingqiu, and Bennett, but don't have them featured here, let me go over quickly how you want to build them. I recommend doing a 4-piece Emblem of the Severed Fate artifact set for both Yu'lon and Xingqiu. You want a crit rate or crit damage headpiece, a hydro damage goblet. For Xingqiu, you typically want an energy recharge sands, and for Yu'lon, you typically want an HP sands. Favonius weapons are extremely good on both of these characters, however, Xingqiu can also run a sacrificial sword, which is really nice, and Yulan can also run a 3-star HP weapon like the recurve bow, or even a weapon like the slingshot, which gives you crit rate. And also happens to be a 3-star weapon that you probably already have. For Bennett, there's a bunch of different ways to build him, but you essentially want him to have 180 plus energy recharge, and then probably some amount of crit rate, crit damage, pyro damage is good, lots of HP for more healing is fine too. People also like running Bennett in instructors, and even though it's a 4-piece set, it's still totally fine for him. And for his weapon, you want to give him the highest base attack sword you have, or give him something like the Favonius sword, which has a pretty low base attack, especially for a 4-star, but the extra energy it can provide your team can be really helpful. Now if you don't have Bennett or Xingqiu and just listed them on the form for some reason, then you don't have as many teams to make, at least for a second team. Your character details are showing a lot of on-field DPS characters, but not a lot of supports. So if it turns out that you don't have Bennett or Xingqiu, I think the next best option for you would be something like a Diluc, Xiangling, Kaya, and another cryo character melt team. Rosaria would ideally be the other character you want to run in this team, but just know that if you run a team like this, your Xiangling is going to be very energy hungry. I wouldn't be surprised if your Xiangling had 250% energy recharge and was still not able to use her burst off cooldown every single time. But hopefully you have Bennett and Xingqiu. If you do, definitely make sure to build up those characters because they are very strong supports, and when you get into the end game, your supporting characters end up dealing more damage or causing your on-field characters to deal way more damage than they could ever do on their own. And if you don't have Bennett or Xingqiu, Bennett will be in the Star Glitter shop in May. You can pick up a copy of Bennett from the banners right now on the Dea and Sino banner, but that is very risky because the other 4-stars, Barbara and Kale, don't really have a good fit anywhere in your team, and you also get those characters for free, so you don't really need to wish for more constellations for them. And if you were to get a copy of Dea or Sino along the way, neither one of them is really going to benefit your account very much, so I think that's pretty risky unless you're very, very far from pity. And Xingqiu is in the Star Glitter shop now. He always runs in March and September, and just like all the other 4-stars in the Star Glitter shop, there's always a 6-month gap in between. But the main thing for you, artifacts. You need lots of artifacts on your characters. So this brings us to another topic. Do you farm Gilded Dreams and Deepwood, or do you farm Emblem? Because what I see in front of me is Alhaitham, Fischl, Kokomi, and you obviously have Dendro Traveler, even though they're not displayed here. I would run the Deepwood Memories domain first. That is a very high value, very efficient domain to run, especially with the team I suggested. Dendro teams and especially Quick Bloom teams have a very high floor, meaning it's really easy to get very high damage numbers without super investing into every single character. So I suggest you farm the Gilded Dreams and the Deepwood Memories domain first. What I would suggest is try to go for a 4-piece Gilded Dreams for Alhaitham, or at least a 2-piece EM, 2-piece EM, like you can use 2-piece Wanderer's Troop, but you want to pay attention to the substats. You want to get around 50 crit rate, 100 crit damage, and about 500 elemental mastery, so go for that, and then you also want him to have about 130 to 140% energy recharge. For Fischl, again, you can use whatever on her. She just wants overall good artifact stats. She doesn't really care about the set that much. So just give her artifacts that have crit rate, crit damage, elemental mastery, attack percent, energy recharge, all the good offensive stats. For your Dendro Traveler, you want to give them a 4-piece Deepwood Memory set. This set will allow Alhaitham to do more damage because it will shred the Dendro resistances of every enemy on the field by 30%, and since it works off-field, it's perfect for an off-field character like the Dendro Traveler. And you definitely don't need the perfect substats on this Deepwood Memory set, you just really need the 4-piece set, and you do want an energy recharge sands for the Dendro Traveler because they are very energy hungry, so you definitely want to make sure they can use their burst off cooldown. Now after you farm that set, you'll do a lot of damage and have a lot of healing with Kokomi, which is perfect for farming the Emblem domain because all the enemies you fight there have Electro Auras on them constantly. Which means that doing Hyper Bloom and doing other Electro reactions in that domain is going to be super easy. Which means that because you built this team first, you can take them into a domain where the enemy aura is going to be really helpful for you, and that'll make it even easier to farm the Emblem and Shiminawa pieces that you want for your characters. emblem for characters like Xingqiu, Xiangling, Yelan, maybe 2-piece emblem for Bennett, and then 2-piece Shiminawa pieces for characters like Zhao, maybe Fischl wants a 2-piece Shiminawa upgrade. And of course you could always give the 2-piece Shiminawa to characters like Keqing because the 2-piece Shiminawa with the 18% attack is just a pretty nice set. And that's the overall plan for you, so definitely hit those artifact domains, make sure to level up your weapons to 90, ascend those characters to 80 plus or 90 in the certain cases that I mentioned. And once you start doing those things, you'll find that it'll be really easy to start hitting the 10k plus numbers that you want to hit.